If you haven't failed, you haven't been playing the game. We've got everything lined up, and lo and behold, it fails. If you're not ready for that, really almost the only way to learn it, though, is to experience it. You have to get yourself in a mentality that being wrong cannot demoralize you.
How we go about navigating the most difficult elements of our life comes down to the decisions that we make. Circumstances aren't always ideal, and so it's on us to navigate them accordingly. How we behave, how we respond, how we control what we can control. Today, you're going to meet somebody who has dealt with quite a lot of adversity in his life, who's also navigated it quite effectively, and now is an advocate and voice for Israel, along with the background in entrepreneurship, an attorney, and much more. Please welcome to the show, Lee Trink. How are you today, sir?
Hey, Jonathan, thanks for having me. Doing great. Beautiful day out here in LA. I'm out on my deck.
It's okay here in New Jersey. Can't say it's the same thing, but it's definitely summertime and the vibes are high. I think an opportune place to start would be something that I haven't heard you talk much about, and that's actually your background as a criminal prosecutor. You spent a few years in Kings County, if I'm not mistaken. I have a background as a prosecutor in the Bronx, actually, SVU. And so I thought that would be kind of a cool place to start, understanding, helping the audience understand how your experience as a prosecutor informs your entrepreneurship and your advocacy for Israel, among other things today.
I have not spoken a lot about it. It feels like many lifetimes ago. That was really the beginning of my career. I spent 3 years at the Brooklyn DA's office. And I think what those jobs teach you, and that job in particular, and I would bet that a gig in Bronx is quite similar. It's really trial by fire because of the people that they hire for those jobs, right? It's a city job. It's a prestigious job, but a very low paying job also. And they take young attorneys and they just drop them in the middle of the court system. And you don't, you learn by doing. And I think that is probably the art of that is lost on a lot of people. I think that in a world where preparing and they're educating themselves and they're learning a discipline, there is something to be said about trial by fire, about being dropped in the deep end of the pool and figuring out how to swim. And I think that's what that job was. I think it taught a number of things, including thinking on your feet, being able to adapt really quickly to your environment. I like, for example, I remember the very first hearing that I had, the first time I ever did a full hearing in court. It wasn't my case. It was another attorney who was in the middle of a trial. The judge would not give him a break and allow him to move it. And so he needed somebody else to stand up on it, on that case. That's what it's called, standing up. You basically go in front of the judge with you have your opponent, which in this case was the defense attorney. And I remember we decided to take the stairs instead of the elevator, so I'd have another couple of minutes to just learn the case a bit. I distinctly remember that, racing up the stairs in the Brooklyn court building.
How has that been for you? What is it like now, in this next chapter of your career?
It definitely it toughens you up in a way also, right? Like, because you've got to think on your feet, and it's not like thinking on your feet in some inconsequential moment. Like, these moments are critical. You've got typically a defendant's liberty at stake. You have a victim's justice at stake. And you also then, to have a third dimension, you have the continuation of your career based on how well or how poorly that you do. So the amount of pressure is really significant. And that's probably, the second, it's almost like a partner of trial by fire, is the pressure and the getting comfortable with immense pressure. Like, I think that's a key part of, those 3 years was the stakes are just super high. And and you don't have the luxury of a lot of time. All of us DAs were overloaded with work. And so you just have to kind of stick and move. All of those things about great entrepreneurs, right? Like being able to handle the pressure, being in a circumstance where you've got to deal with things that maybe you didn't expect, curveballs that happen to you, and you've got to, the way I'll describe it is you got to stand tall in the pocket when, when things are getting really hectic around you. I think that part, all of that followed me into entrepreneurship. And frankly, even, when I got my first record label job, even though I spent kind of almost a year in this like music marketing job as like an intern, as like a segue from the DA's office into the real music business. When I talked my way into that job, because it was really it required talking my way into a job that I shouldn't have gotten. All of my references were from the DA's office. All of my experiences, literally, I never mentioned that music marketing company that I worked for as a reason of why they should hire me. It didn't. None of it seemed to matter. Whereas so many of the lessons that I learned in the DA's office were the lessons that I brought to that next job. That again, I was like way over my head in that job, and without a doubt, brought through all of my entrepreneurial ventures, because it's, that started, and then it was a continuation of like constantly testing your mettle, like constantly putting you under extreme pressure and having to perform under extreme pressure.
So it's interesting that you say that because it obviously resonates. That's how I feel. That trial by fire and dealing with pressure, adaptability, like these are key traits that would you say can be taught, or do you think that you need that kind of spirit or attribute that is already innate in somebody? Is that something that people can learn?
I do think people can learn it. I think that some people have a better aptitude for it. Some people are inherently better risk takers. They're better under pressure. But I do believe you can learn that trait. And I think that really almost the only way to learn it, though, is to experience it. It's not reading about pressure in a book doesn't do it. You might be able to kind of wrap your head around how it might feel, but you will not know how you perform under those circumstances until you are on the hot spots. It's a similar thing of, 1 second left on the clock you know, at a basketball game, and do you want the ball, right? There are some people that want the ball, that want that pressure, because they believe that despite the pressure, they can excel and they can achieve. But being in that position multiple times and being at it time and time again, one, gets you comfortable with it, and two, gives you the confidence that you can deliver under those circumstances. Because otherwise, until you're faced with that particular perform or lose, right? Like that's it. You're on the spot, 1 second on the clock. Either you're going to sink it or you're going to lose the game. You don't know how you're going to behave in the locker room, at the practice, the morning where you're putting your shoes on. You only know after you do it. And the more you do it, you start to get a better sense of, am I the kind of person that can stand tall in the pocket, that can deal with immense pressure and still deliver at the highest level?
It's such an important point because for the longest time, I felt like if I could just, those moments of insecurity, lack of awareness, wanting but not knowing how to execute, you don't realize that sometimes it's just about being willing to put yourself in the game and take the shot or stand up in court and get torn apart to pieces and learn how to manage those emotions when, like you were saying, someone's life, liberty, and justice is on the line. And like that is such a key trait and attribute to have, but also has to be cultivated, like you were saying, through experience. And people are selling themselves short on experience by not being willing to put themselves in the game. And you were talking about how you talked yourself into the next stage of your career, which is in entertainment. You spent a few years in there. If I'm not mistaken, you get into eSports after that. Like, there's a few other things along the way, other ventures. How does your career look when you reflect on it?
If you haven't failed, in all likelihood, you haven't been playing the game. That's just it. It's like nobody bats 1,000, right? It is a reason why, you know, great baseball players are bat 300, meaning that, you know, they miss 7 out of 10 shots, right? Or 7 out of 10 balls. I used to say that about the record business, that that's how maddening it is to figure out how to put yourself in a mindset to go, you know, to go succeed in the next venture, in the next record, in the next artist, because it's almost like baseball is actually similar in terms of percentage. Like if you bat 300 as a record exec, you're killing it. You're killing it. But what that means is you're wrong 70% of the time. And so you have to get yourself in a mentality that being wrong or quote unquote failing on it cannot demoralize you. That's called Tuesday. That's not something to like fall apart over. Because if you fall apart over it, you shouldn't be in that business. And if you really fall apart over a failure, you probably shouldn't be an entrepreneur. You know, it's there are certain vocations, there are certain, you know, certainly being an entrepreneur, you're spending a lot of your time failing, or you're spending a lot of your time feeling like you might be failing. And so in order to overcome that, like you have to steel your mind in order to show up every day. And regardless of if you got your ass kicked the day before and, you know, strap your helmet on and get back in the game, like that's just it, right? If I reflect back on different failures, you know, I think about that in terms of artists all the time. I have like a running list in my head of the greatest failures I've ever had in the record business. Because if you talk to me at the time, I believed wholly in the artist and our ability to succeed. And I thought, this is, you know, I remember there's one artist, and I remember we did a showcase. This was when I was president of Capitol Records. And I remember we had a showcase, and I said, like, this is like uh, uh, the, a different result, but that same, you know, moment of like pointing at the lights, being up at bat. And I said, we are going to be talking about this day. When this artist wins Grammys, we will talk about this night when we heard this artist perform. And I believed in that record. I believed in that artist, and it went nowhere, and it failed spectacularly. And I've got plenty of those stories of like incredible artists, incredible records. I loved them then, and it didn't work, you know, and you got to get up the next day. There's no shortage of artists where I look at them like, man, we all looked at each other and we said, this is happening. This is going to happen. It's too good. It's too good. The plan is great. We've got everything lined up. And lo and behold, it fails. And if you're not ready for that, you should get a regular job. Like that's it. Like it's not for everybody. You know, entrepreneurship is not for everyone. You know, like I remember I've said, I said to one point, you know, entrepreneurship is like getting kicked in the nuts every day until it stops. Like that's kind of what it is. It's like you're getting your head kicked in constantly, and you hope at some point it stops happening. And sometimes that happens, and sometimes it doesn't. So you have to have the stomach for failure. You have to you've got to take the lessons of failure. And, if you can, if you can do that, and it doesn't mean we don't hurt from those failures. It doesn't mean that they don't mean anything to our lives or our emotions, but it's overcoming that. And despite how it feels, that despite how challenging it is, that you're able to kind of collect yourself, put the pieces together, and either show up again in that venture, or maybe you say, okay, it's time to move on to another venture. Tried this didn't work, and we're going to try something different now because of self-belief, right? The belief that you can do it again, or you can do it differently, or you can in any version of that.
I love that you mentioned self-belief. I mean, some of the things that you've already talked about, the trial by fire, and how you're managing your emotions in failure, and making sure that you, like you said, steel your mind. Something that I talk about often is mental toughness, and I talk about mental toughness as a practice, meaning that it consists of all these different elements that you're talking about: the grit, perseverance, the ability to love yourself, the ability to believe in yourself, the ability to persist even when things aren't going your way. And to a lot of people, they could sound overrated and cliche. And recently I was speaking at Stanford on this particular topic in the age of AI: what mental toughness is, why you need it, how to build it, and how to find purpose through mental toughness, purpose through service. And then, when I look at your career and I see everything that you accomplished, esteemed experience as a prosecutor, a media and entertainment executive, CEO of an eSports gaming company. Maybe we could also give the audience some insight from your perspective. What are some of the things under your belt that have informed your perspective to this stage, so we can level set the playing field for who's offering this insight? Because I don't think the audience really has been able to fully wrap their heads around where your experience is coming from, even though we've talked about like two industries so far. Technically, esports is like part of entertainment, right? We could say. But now you're venturing into this whole other layer of advocacy for Israel, and we're obviously going to touch on that. Let's help the audience understand who Lee Trink is, where this insight is coming from, because I know, but I think they need to hear it from you.
If I go back to the beginning of my career, number one, I have like one career with this prosecutor thing, right? Like, I decided to leave. There's a few different circumstances. Largely, they kind of pissed me off, and it made me look at my paycheck, which was really, really low. And so I decided to leave. But it taught me that I could love a job, because I loved it. I loved being a prosecutor. I loved the work. And so that was really important to me. And, because I had been in bands my whole life, and I did want to make money. And so I thought, well, I don't know what they do, but my impression is that there are people that make real money in the music business. And so I kind of like steamrolled my way in there. But kind of a hallmark for, honestly, how I've done everything, but it started at my first record label, is kind of listening to myself over what was conventional wisdom. It's really been a hallmark of my success. And, from working at companies into my own entrepreneurial ventures. And, what I said in the beginning, when I was brand new, because I figured I was at a job where you're really not supposed to be as new as I was in it. And so I realized I was probably made some people nervous, especially artists that I was working with, because I was really the key partner within the record label for the artist and the manager. I always try and talk about any weakness and put it out front, and try and look at it differently for myself, and then have them look at it differently. And one of the things that I used to say is, well, how people talk about out of the box thinking. I said, well, I don't have a box. I don't have enough experience to have a box. The first artist that I broke, which was really a dark horse artist for that label, it was kind of vilified in the label. No budget, no attention, never on the weekly meetings to talk about. And I believed, and I didn't let other people who supposedly knew better overly influence my own convictions. That was a really big turning point. It was actually something I learned in law school. It was I had a professor of mine, Aaron Tversky, interesting, a Hasidic rabbi that kind of taught me to question everything. Like it was through conflicts of law class that he really taught this kind of concept of just because they're a judge doesn't mean they're right. Right. Like that, which was kind of like, whoa, like you're always taught to like respect authority and listen to authority. And like that was kind of an earth-shattering revelation for me. And so I don't even think I drew the parallel, but when I went into that label, when I came across this artist and I thought, oh my God, this is incredible. And everybody kind of told me what an asshole I was for thinking about it. I kind of wasn't dismayed. I just thought, I don't know. I kind of think I'm right. And I'm just going to do my thing. And I was a nuisance. And now that kind of artist with no budget, no attention, no anything, there was a thing we called it, this was at Atlantic Records, we called it the Artist Protection Program. Because once you went in, nobody heard from you, nobody saw you, nobody, right? And he was in this Artist Protection Program. We ended up selling 14 million records. That was Kid Rock. And that was my first success. And then that like almost cemented that idea in my head. I was like, oh, all of you geniuses who were kind of telling me, I don't know anything, get in line, listen to whomever. And here it was. Not only was I right and you guys were wrong, you guys were spectacularly wrong on this. That really locked in my head of follow your inner voice, trust yourself. And as a result, and I did that again, like I broke tons of artists. The hallmark of my career in the record side of the business was breaking artist after artist after artist, which is also why I became president of Capitol Records in a pretty short amount of time. Between my first record label job at Atlantic and being president of Capitol was 10 years. Pretty short. And I do believe that my law school background and the DA's office background actually helped me accelerate that. And also my confidence, my like unabashed, somewhat of a bull in the china shop methodology at times, that really worked for me. And you get the first few right, and then all of a sudden people stop thinking about you as an asshole that's just causing trouble. And they're like, well, wait a second, maybe that guy knows something that we don't know. So those were really important formations, and that I continue to take with me until today. And now it's different, right? Because when you've accomplished a lot of things, okay, people are more likely to heed what you're saying and listen to what you're saying, but not always. People are always naysayers, right? Like there's, haters are kind of everywhere, right? Haters are like the constant, there's always haters around entrepreneurs because the entrepreneurs are doers and haters tend to come from an ilk of non-doers, right? Like there's there's an amazing quote from Teddy Roosevelt that's like my favorite quote. It's like called "The Man in the Arena." I don't know if you're familiar with that one, but right, it's easy to be a critic, hard to be in the arena. Marred with blood and mud and sweat, and that's and I think those of us who find themselves in the arena constantly, we know that. We know what critics are made up of. We know what that class of individuals are from. It doesn't mean that they don't get to us at times, but I think the best of us know, we've got thick skin, we can deal with it. And also it certainly helps if you have succeeded many times, especially when it's really difficult to succeed in environments where it's difficult to succeed. I think that's also the benefit I had even in becoming an entrepreneur is I came from a business that's so brutal. It's so sharp elbowed. I would talk about, breaking a new artist. If you look at it mathematically, it's really next to impossible. There's so many artists that come out every year. Like, who would have the audacity to think that your artist, is going to be able to swim through the 800,000 other records that get released that year? Like you have to, something almost has to be wrong with you. But you're also kind of like an entrepreneur. You have to be a little, you have to be willing to create your own reality in some ways. I think the reason why I speak with some amount of authority is I've done a lot. I've put points on the board again and again and again. I've probably broken, I don't know, 12, 15 artists. I've created resurgence for big artists that were, had kind of seen better days, and whether it's Lenny Kravitz or Cohen, and revitalizing, those careers. That's another form of impossible, because usually once an artist starts to have a slide, it's quite challenging to kind of recapture success. I think all of those things also come with some form of audacity to think you can succeed where others failed. And like one of the things that I love talking about and I point to all the time on that subject is artists that I've broken that were dropped by other record labels. And I mean big artists, right? So I mentioned Kid Rock, right? Like, we broke Kid Rock on his fourth album. The last artist that I broke was dropped by two record labels before we signed her and had immense success. It was Katy Perry. Katy Perry was dropped by two other labels. I think that audacity to believe you can succeed precisely where others have failed is also a hallmark of great entrepreneurs.
You touched on so much there that I'm going to do my best to distill it. First off, I guess we'll take it in reverse order with the audacity. Having that ability to, and it relates back to what you were talking about with your law professor, how he was already implanting the notion of just because this authority says X doesn't mean it's the way or that it's right. I didn't learn that till I was actually at the DA's office. I understood the concept of question everything, but I didn't have enough self-confidence to actually see it through until there were some really heinous things that were being done in court or on my cases where I was like, all right, I got to speak up. Otherwise, things are just going to happen and I'm going to be responsible for it. And I can't have that happen. And you eventually learn oh, that's right. Oh, you have a good point. Oh, it's wait, I'm allowed to be right. Wait, hold on. Yeah, I am right. And then you start to believe in yourself more. And you had a whole bunch of other wins that follow up, even though there's tons of people telling you no. And the way that it actually transpired for you is kind of like the inverse, where you're like, well, I understand that what they're saying is right, that they think that they're right, but I think I'm right, and I'm going to continue to do it my way, not out of a self-aggrandizing or this stubborn approach, but rather an unwavering confidence rooted in experience that stemmed from training, that stemmed from trial by fire. And those wins, that willingness to put yourself in the action, I can't express enough and emphasize enough that when people listen to this episode, or whether it's the episode coming out with F-16 pilot Michelle Curran or Navy SEAL Rich Diviney, there are people who are in the field, servicemen who are in the field, and they understand what it means to be in action. And we have to be willing to put ourselves in the field to get the type of disproportionate results and outcomes that we're seeking, rather than complaining things aren't happening to us just because we're sitting here waiting. And you're a prime example of that. So after you go through this experience of running running a music label, you get into eSports, you spend some time over there. What was that experience like for you? And how did you transition out of it into the next stage that you're in with advocacy for Israel?
The esports thing it developed organically. Like originally, somebody that worked for me showed me an article about eSports and about the viewership, and encouraged me to say, okay, I'm going to take a look at it because I hadn't heard the word eSports. It was basically about the League of Legends finals in that particular year being having higher viewership than the finals of any other sport except the Super Bowl. And I had never heard the word eSports. And I thought, well, I consider myself a student of pop culture. How can it be if something is this big and I've never heard about it? Let's go take a look. And then I started exploring it, and I ended up signing the FaZe Clan guys to my management company, right? To my artist management company. I was managing artists. And so we started acting as like their first business arm. And then, because I had a front row seat to that for a couple of years and I was in really early, I was able to see what was happening in that community. I got exposed to that community in a way that most people in my position were wholly unaware of. And so that motivated me to close my management company and kind of go all in on esports and FaZe Clan. Then, look, we can do a 5-hour podcast on just like the trials and tribulations of FaZe Clan, but there were a lot of bad actors that were involved in the organization throughout, and that experience was, it was incredible, and it was, we the journey that we had was always really interesting. I often used to say, well, look, in any given week, 10 things happened that would be, maybe any one of them would be the most notable thing that would happen to any other company or brand in an entire year. And 7 of them would be incredibly, positive, and 3 of them would be nearly catastrophic. And that was kind of the way, like, we were just this lightning rod for controversy, and it was a mixture of excitement, and it was maddening, and it really stretched you to your entrepreneurial limits. And what was incredible is, like, we were really driving that whole industry. Like, everybody really looked to us as the leaders because we were doing things and we were pioneering things that nobody else was doing. Part of the challenge was we had nobody to look at and say, oh, we can do that, or we can try this, or that's a model that might work for us, because we were kind of building the plane while we were flying the plane, another cliche, except we didn't know if it was supposed to be a plane or a submarine. And we just kept it moving. And so, the experience was, I would say, unparalleled in a number of years. The amount of differing experiences that we had been through was, probably decades worth of entrepreneurial experience under that, because we were the biggest version of we were in the world. And again, like, every ceiling, we broke every ceiling. And so that was incredible, but it was also challenging because you sort of, again, we were always, there was nobody alongside us for us to kind of look at and gauge what we were doing, because most people were kind of doing some iteration of what we were already doing.
Your friend, colleague, and a guest on this podcast, Jennifer Cohen, talks about the practice of being bold. And through your career, she wrote a book on it, in fact. Through your career, it sounds like you've made some very bold decisions, being decisive. And you also mentioned going all in on, despite the fact you had all this success breaking all these artists, you took another risk in going into another industry in esports and building a brand. Studying a bit of that story, like you said, we could do a 5-hour podcast on that, but we only have limited time. So I want to be respectful of your time and make sure that we make the most of this conversation. And I think it's an opportune point to talk about Israel. You've become a voice advocating for Israel. Obviously, there's tons of challenges that come along with that. I have experience. I served 2 years in the Israeli military infantry combat, as my audience knows. Israel is near and dear to my heart. I visited the concentration camps. I lived in Israel. My grandparents are Holocaust survivors. I've interviewed UFC fighter Natan Levy. Rudy Rockman's coming on the podcast. I've known him since he's like 19 years old. He served with my brother in the IDF. Holocaust survivor Dr. Edith Eger's been on this show. Stephen Pressfield's been on this show. And, you know, there's this through line and thread, Ariel Helwani. There's this through line and thread, Ryan Terrell, pardon me, that all these high-performing Jewish individuals who have taken it upon themselves to be an outspoken voice and advocate for Israel. You're like kind of on the front lines of the social media war. How are you battling it? What's your strategy? And, you know, what are you hoping to accomplish? What's the best case scenario for you with all of your work?
You know, for me, how this started, I was actually on vacation on October 7th, kind of thinking about what I wanted to do for my next venture. And so I had a lot of time to think. I had never been involved in activism. And like you, all my grandparents are Holocaust survivors. My father was actually born in a forced labor camp in Kazakhstan because my grandparents were kind of seized by the Russians when they were fleeing Poland. And sort of despite that, it just was never a big part of my identity. I didn't hide from it, but it just wasn't a big part of it. And my parents are from Israel. The first thing that kind of hit me was this is on my watch. That was like the line that just kept turning over in my head. This is on my watch. And I am in a position of, I have a big network, that I have a lot of kind of personal resources and relationships and resources. And so that of this is on this is on your watch. And then it was, what are you going to do? Right? Like it was almost an exercise of who are you? Who are you? And who are you going to be in this moment? And, you know, there were things that I started to get involved with behind the scenes. But then as far as like the front facing social media side, and I'd always posted to social media. I talked about entrepreneurship stuff, and I talked about Phase Clan and some of those things. But what really struck me, and you know, I started reposting a lot of other information. But what struck me was I thought in really, you know, getting a temperature, because one of the things that I've done my whole career is like understand and put my finger on the pulse of audience is how I did it career-wise. But it's still like putting your finger on the pulse of what are people experiencing? What do they want to experience? What they need? And what I felt was, and when I decided to start making videos myself, was pretty simply, Jews that are scared need to see Jews that are not scared. That's literally how I started. And even my first, you know, my first post was admitting, hey, look, I've been blissfully asleep, not understanding, you know, where we were, and actually misunderstanding. Forget about not understanding, misunderstanding. I believe that anti-Semitism was just like another type of hate. People hate Jews like tons of people hate other tons of people. That's it. And we're just one of those, you know, people that are hated. And that was wrong. We're somehow different. The rules are different for us. And I also, despite what my parents and grandparents told me growing up, I believed there's no chance the Holocaust could happen again. We are so much more evolved as a civilization. And that was another closely held belief that was just shattered. Nothing is more important. Like, what good is having money or standing or success or fill in the blank? But what good is having any of it if you have to hide who you are, if you have to fight for who you are? Like, it's too important not to put, I mean, frankly, for many months, I was putting almost all of my attention on it. And even now, I'm about 50-50. I spend 50% of my time on activism related, activities. Social media is just part of that. Like social media is not the totality of it. Although I both enjoy it and I feel like there's a role that I'm playing in there, and there's a voice that I have in there that people seem to be responding to. And then the other half is also looking at other ventures and paying the bills and things like that. On the activism front, it's just too important, and I don't know that I care about anything without at least working extremely hard to fix these problems. Like it's just the rest of it is not worth anything. Honestly, I would feel like a fraud as a person, as somebody who has a strong moral compass, that has strong values, that has, a deep relationship with within the Jewish community, with deep ties to Israel. I would feel like a fraud if I were not spending a significant amount of my time on this subject matter. So it's it's the emotional side of it, and there's also the side of you know that nothing else is worth it without achieving, without remedying this. And then frankly, there's the third part, which is a subject we covered, which is I put in the audacity bucket, which is I have somehow the audacity to believe that I can make an impact on it. And I just do. And I hope I'm right. I feel, certainly when I get some of the comments that I've received, it does make me feel like, am I making a dent in the grand scheme? Not yet. And I hope to do that too. But certainly with, Jews that are experiencing a lot of pain and anguish around the world, when I get certain notes from people that I don't know, like it's incredibly rewarding, and I feel like okay, my time spent is good time spent.
I remember one time I was driving back with a couple of friends from the Hamptons. Been to the Hamptons like maybe 3 times in my life, and I'm driving back. One of the people in the car is from another country, and she kind of had posed. I didn't really talk the whole car ride, even though I was driving. And one of the things that she had kind of posed was like, "Do you ever think?" This was a couple of years ago. Do you ever think that we've been brainwashed into thinking what we are believing, what we believe as Jews? This is the only time that I had talked during the entire car ride where I was like, what? Like, they tried to murder my family in the Holocaust. Like, it is personal. This isn't like, oh, they told me about the Torah in Jewish day school, therefore, like, I believe what I believe. No, this is straight up personal, that because you are who you are, they don't care, girl, boy, whatever you want to call yourself. If you have any connection to Judaism, they want nothing to do with you. And it's a much broader they, right? But I think especially being on the front lines as a criminal prosecutor in 2020, and experiencing what it was like to work for the government during a pandemic, the George Floyd protests, being Jewish, and then seeing what happened on October 7th, speaking to activists and having the background that I do, and having conversations like this. Like, it is so important to have voices like yours using the platform to help people manage the fear, understand and internalize the fear, and not be afraid to stand up for yourself and have the words. Because a lot of people, they may believe what they believe and don't know why, and someone may say something like that to them where they feel like they've been brainwashed, and then they come across a post like yours and have the words and have the arguments and have like the reminder of what the beliefs are rooted in, and not just reflect on the things that they were told in grade school or that their parents told them, but actually have something meaningful and substantive to rely on when they go and make points or counterpoints to someone else, or look at themselves in the mirror and don't have to question their identity, because they know that it's rooted in things that maybe they can't articulate from a history book circa 1800 or 800 BC, but they know in their heart and soul and mind that it resonates with them, because the moral compass of what Judaism represents aligns with their values and integrity, and is amplified when someone calls it out, because they know what to stand for. Lee, I've had such an awesome time talking to you today. Thank you so much. There's a question that I pose to all my guests that I want to pose to you. If the future version of yourself from 10 years from now were to fly in and offer you some advice in order to get there, what do you think he would say to you?
Well, I hope he would say, don't give up on this path, because you're going to get to where you want to get to.
Please let the audience know where they can keep up with your journey.
You can check me out on I'm mainly on Instagram at Lee Trink, on X or Twitter on Lee Trink, and TikTok, which I really don't post a lot, but I'm trying to change that. I'm Lee.Trink.
This has been awesome. Thank you so much, sir. Until the next one.
Yeah, thanks for having me.